So a little bit about the language acquisition process. Um, First, I want to mention that phonemes are the smallest unit of sounds in the English language, and there are 41 phonemes in the English language. In the standard dialect, there might be more in others, but then morphemes are the smallest bit of meaning in the language. I will get into those two areas more in later slides. Syntax, of course, a lot of you probably already know this, that syntax is the rules of the language, and it involves things like how to make things plural, how to change verbs and conjugate verbs, and uh, all the rules basically to make it sound like uh, language makes sense and is logical, which maybe this talk is not sounding syntactic right now. Sorry about that. Semantics then is about the greater meaning of sentences and what is meant by um, word vocabulary and um, basically definitions of things. And it does kind of go along with morphemes, so that can get confusing, and I'm not going to go into that later. And pragmatics is just the general social rules of language, which can vary by area, by culture, with dialect and things like that. But it has to do with everything from gestures and facial expressions to tone, and then figures of speech, all those things. And some of you have mentioned in your presentations about kids with different disabilities not being able to understand idioms of language, like it's raining cats and dogs, and they would think that it's really raining cats and dogs. That's part of pragmatics. So to go further into language development, this page illustrates the order of acquisition for phonemes in English, and this is for spoken phonemes, of course, not being able to hear them. A quick explanation here: if you're an early grades teacher, you probably already are teaching these sounds in phonics and phonemic awareness. This book, and the page right here that you're looking at, has some of the sounds written in phonetic symbols, but starting at the one below V, those sounds are sh, like in fish, and then T, of course, and then the ng sound, like at the end of ring, and then and then L, of course, and then the ch sound, and then z, j, the soft th sound, th, and then the final sound there is the, and that last one there is the zh sound, like in treasure. Those symbols just are ways of noting and being able to spell things phonetically. It's just a little trick for linguists, but we don't really need to know that. You may notice that that missing from this list is the vowel sounds, like long and short vowels and all the other ones. Those are typically acquired before consonant sounds, and you hear it in the baby cooing very early on, and I don't need to tell the parents in this group about that. So looking at this chart, the first sounds acquired are p, like potato, p, and then H and N and B, and those are typically by age 2. And it begins earlier. It begins, as you can see up there, at age 1. So a child can reliably produce those sounds, definitely by age 2 and beginning at age 1, and actually before that. If you notice, 3 of these sounds are made with either your lips or the tongue, the tip of your tongue, in the front of your mouth, and that's where it's easier to produce sounds. And the H sound is also kind of easy because it's just like breathing, and you breathe out a little bit and you make the H sound. So from this, we see that children move from easier sounds to more complex sounds, like the W sound that requires you to move your lips in a certain way without closing them, or the K and G sound for K and G, both made the same way in the back of your mouth with the top of your tongue in the back. But one is voiced and one's not. K is not voiced, and G is voiced. You do not need to know all these. I like talking about it, so that's why I'm going on. But SLPs know each of these sounds and how they're made, and who might have trouble with them based on a disability, and definitely who has trouble making them by observation. and what interventions and strategies to use for each sound. If you're interested in learning more about these things, you should take an introduction class in linguistics or look it up online. Morphemes are a bit more difficult than phonemes. Morphemes are the smallest unit of meaning in the language. Starting out simply, the word house is a morpheme. It means house. We all know what it means, and we can picture the structure of a house. Unless you're a master linguist of some kind, you probably can't break up the word house into parts that have independent meaning, and that's kind of the rule of a morpheme. If you can't break it down into smaller parts that have meaning, and it has to be all parts that you would break it into would have meaning, then it's a morpheme. If you can break it up into several parts that have meaning, then those are morphemes, and the entire word is not a morpheme. So also the word dog is one morpheme, and it's just one syllable, one word, dog, morpheme. And we all know what that looks like. So again, no breaking up that word into separate meaningful parts. Now take the word dog house. The word dog house is two morphemes. I can break it up into dog and house. It's not what you thought of when I first said house, and it probably isn't what you thought of when I said dog either. But put the two words together and you make a whole different word, and a whole different picture comes into your mind. This is how you find morphemes. You try to break up the words into smaller bits that have meaning of their own. Be careful though, it's not about spelling or syllables, it's about meaning. So like the word spaghetti, it has 3 syllables, but only one morpheme. As far as I know, I mean, if you go back to Italian, maybe it does, but we're just going to say spaghetti, one word, one morpheme. It can't be broken up into littler parts. For a language sample analysis, we are mostly concerned with the morphemes that are acquired first, and which Brown, who was a researcher and an analyst of language, dubbed his Brown's 14 morphemes, and they indicate development of language and acquisition of language. By analyzing a language sample, you can estimate a child's age. If the child has a disability, they might be at a developmental age in language that does not match their chronological age. So kids are learning to say all kinds of morphemes. Each word they learn is at least one morpheme, like I said before. But Brown's morphemes are particular categories of morphemes that are acquired in a predictable sequence and timeline. Some of these are syntactic, meaning the child is learning to use syntactic rules of language. This would be things like the ing ending, the plural s, and then the prepositions in and on are indications of spatial and semantic learning. Using both the phonemes in the previous slide and the morphemes in this slide, you can determine whether a child is on track for expressive language and syntax development. At the bottom of this page, there's a note that says mastery means the child uses the morpheme appropriately 90% of the time in obligatory context. And for example, in the example of doggy on sofa, if the doggy is indeed on the sofa and the child only says doggy sofa, then they are not using the preposition appropriately. The child is also not using it appropriately if they say doggy under sofa or doggy in sofa when the dog is actually on the sofa. So you look at what the child would be expected to say, that would make sense that they would say, and if they're not using the correct morphemes, then you put a tally against their use of that morpheme. So again, you do not need to be able to conduct an LSA, a language sample analysis, but it will be helpful for you to know these concepts, especially when the SLP comes to talk to you about the child's language development. And a word of caution. A child may not produce a morpheme, and rather than it being a mistake in morpheme use, or a morphological error, it could be an articulation error or an indication of cultural diversity. The child might not be able to say the S sound. They might not be able to physically do that. And therefore they don't use the plural S or the possessive S or the third person S or the contractible auxiliary S. It is also the case that in some cultures that typical speakers do not add an S sound for the third person. Instead of saying he makes the pizza, the person would just say he make the pizza. And we should be aware of a possible articulation difficulties and not include cultural differences in speech errors. So, this is a language transcript that someone recorded. So first they recorded it, and it's a 100 utterance language sample, and that means they got 100 utterances from the child. They also got utterances from the adult. And you can tell a lot about the child's language environment from how the adult in the room talks to them. This adult happens to not be their parent, so if I were doing this language sample, I'd want to have it with the parent so that I could see what the child is typically dealing with when the parent talks to them, or the teacher. So we have what the child says is in bold, and that's really what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to focus on the other ones. So how old are you? And the child answers 3.5. And in order to count morphemes there, I am going to count that as 4, because 3.5 is 4 words. They can't be broken down into more words or morphemes. And I think it's debatable whether that child knows exactly what 3.5 means, and that they're saying 4 separate words, really. And for example, when I was a kid and I first heard the word hide-a-bed, which is one of those couches that folds away, it comes out with a bed and then you fold it back in and it's a couch. I just thought it was 2 words and it was like some kind of proper noun, hide-a, and then bed. I didn't realize that they were saying hide-a-bed, and you may think I'm silly for not realizing that at first. My parents sure did, but it took me a while to figure out. And with kids, they're not always aware of what's making up their utterances, but we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that's 4 morphemes. Second sentence or second utterance is 1 morpheme. We can see that pretty clearly. Third one, a hammer. It's just a and hammer. You can't break that hammer up into more morphemes, so it's just going to be 2. And then another thing that you want to know about this is that you're not going to count repetitions like this. We put nails down with it. You're just going to count the we once. You don't want to give her credit for more morphemes just because she's repeating herself in the sentence. And same with ma. That's an approximation of my. She just kind of started to say my and then stopped and said it again, so we're not going to count that. Same with a and n there. One time my dad took me to a nail house, so let's count those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 morphemes, pretty simple, nothing complicated there. We do have the irregular past tense of took instead of take. And then this one, there were lots of nails into the house, which is odd to say into, because Daddy had to pick me up. So let's count those. And before I do, I'm going to make sure I notice these. This is a plural one, lot and s, nail and s, and that's it. There was lots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. This child is very advanced in her language, and we could see it from the start. Well, we put down nails with it. These first ones, she could have been a typical 3.5-year-old, but this one here is definitely the language of an advanced, I think, 3.5-year-old. Lots of morphemes there in that sentence, lots of words, and she definitely has some things to say. I'm not going to go through this whole 50-word utterance. Or 100-word. I didn't mean to scare you with that. I just wanted to give you an example of how to count morphemes as you're going through here. And based on this, you would count up all the morphemes that you have, and we looked at 6 utterances. And you would take all those totals that you had and divide by 6 to give you the total morphemes per utterance. So just to real quick calculate an MLU, we have 4 in this one, 5, 6, 7, 8, not that one, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41. Oh, too bad it couldn't have been 42. 41 divided by 6 is 6.833 for an MLU. And what I didn't tell you before about MLU is that it typically corresponds with age. So an MLU there with this child, even though she says she's 3.5, she would be close to 7 years old as far as this language sample is concerned. So another way you can analyze that language sample is to compare that child's use of Brown's 14 morphemes and decide whether or not she's on track. And you look at the ages here. She's at 3.5. So by now she should be using everything up until about 39 months. So she should be using ing. She should use in and on correctly. She should use the regular plural s. Let's see, irregular past possessives s. Oh, sorry. Irregular past, came, fell, broke. So that child, remember, she was using took. And so that's right on track for up to 46 months. And then possessive s, mommy's balloon broke, 26 to 40. And you would just take this chart right here and decide whether or not the child was using these morphemes correctly for about her age. So for type token ratio, like I said, it's a measure of diversity, language diversity, and we're trying to find out how many times she said each word, or basically how many different words she said and how many repeated words there are in her count. So I typed these into Excel because I didn't want to count the words and try to catch repeating words. So I sort A to Z, and there you can see she's got, now you can count the words that she's got different. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh. Are we going to count dad or daddy? You just have to make that decision if you're going to count it as 1 or 2. And I think I'll just count it as one word. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Again, this is just one word. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. And as you can see, she uttered 38 words total. So we're going to say equals 30 out of 38. And her type token ratio is high. She's got a lot of diversity. Like I said before, average or typical would be 0.5. So she's saying a lot of different words in her in this language sample.